In this video, we'll take a look at section 7.2, which is on the quadratic formula. So our first objective, we're going to be solving quadratic equations using the quadratic formula. So we've seen two other methods for solving quadratic equations. We saw to factor, and then we set each factor equal to 0, and then solve each equation. Then in the previous section, we saw the method of completing the square, and then using the square root principle. Now we're going to take a look at another method, which is using the quadratic formula. Now, the quadratic formula can be used when your equation is in standard form. ax squared plus bx plus c equal to 0. So mainly, one side has to be equal to 0. And now the quadratic formula, it's x equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Let's take a look at an example. So the reason why we have the other two methods, completing the square and the quadratic formula, is because sometimes we are not able to factor out the quadratic equation that we have. So we have to use those two methods to solve. Now instead of using the completing the square method, I could also use this quadratic formula. So I have 2x squared equal to 4 plus 7x. So for this example, we want to solve this using the quadratic formula. So first, I could subtract 7x and subtract 4 from both sides in order to get one side to be equal to 0. So now I have 2x squared minus 7x minus 4 is equal to 0. So now I have it in standard form, which means I could use my quadratic formula to solve this equation. So let's identify our a, b, and c. Our a is the coefficient of x squared, which is 2. Our b is the coefficient of x, which is negative 7. And then our c is the constant term, which is negative 4. Now let's plug in our values into the quadratic formula and begin to simplify. So I have x is equal to negative and then b, which is negative 7. I have plus or minus square root of negative 7 squared minus 4 times a. My a is 2, and then times c, which is negative 4. And I have all over 2a. So all over 2 times 2. Now it's all about simplifying. So I have x is equal to, well, negative 7 is positive 7. I have plus or minus the square root of, so negative 7 raised to the second power gives me 49. Now if I multiply negative 4 times 2 is negative 8. Negative 8 times negative 4 gives me positive 32. I have all over 2 times 2, which is 4. Simplifying a little bit further, I have 7 plus or minus the square root of 81, all over 4. Continue to simplify. I get 7 plus or minus square root of 81 is 9, and I have over 4. Now, notice that this gives us two results. One of them is using the positive symbol, and the other one is using the minus symbol. So let's go ahead and split up our two solutions. We have 7 plus 9 over 4. And x is equal to 7 minus 9 over 4. So we get x is equal to, so 7 plus 9 gives us 16 over 4. 16 over 4 gives us 4. Next equation. I have x is equal to, now 7 minus 9 gives me negative 2. So I have negative 2 over 4, which gives me negative 1/2. So my two solutions are x equals 4 and x equals negative 1/2. And now we have our two solutions for our quadratic equation. Let's take a look at another problem. So we have 3x squared plus 2x is equal to 7. So first, let's get one side to be 0. So subtract 7 from both sides. I get 3x squared plus 2x minus 7 is equal to 0. So I have it in standard form. I have my equation in standard form. I have one side equal to 0. Now let's plug it into our formula. So we have x is equal to negative and then b. Well, my b in this case is 2. I have plus or minus square root of b squared. So I have 2 raised to the second power minus 4 times a. My a in this case is 3. times c, which is negative 7. And I have all over 2a, so 2 times my a, which is 3. Now simplifying, I get x is equal to, I have negative 2 plus or minus square root of 4, so 2 raised to the second power gives me 4. Now I have negative 4 times 3, which is negative 12. Negative 12 times negative 7 is going to give me positive 84. And I have all over 2 times 3, which is 6. Simplify further, I get negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 88. I have over 6. Now square root of 88, we need to simplify that. So let's go ahead and break it down with the factor tree to see how we could simplify that square root. So first two numbers that multiply give me 88. I'm going to use 8 and 11. Now this 8 could break down to 2 and 4, and then the 4 could break down to 2 and 2. So since we're dealing with square root, we need 2 of the same number in order to take it out of the radical. So in this case, I do have 2 2's, which means I could take a 2 out and put it on the outside. So now I have x is equal to negative 2 plus or minus 2 times the square root of, and what did I have left over was this 11 and 2. Multiply those together and put that back inside the square root. So I have 11 times 2, which is 22, which goes back on the inside, and I have over 6. Okay. Now from here we could simplify even further than this. Now since these terms are all divisible by 2, I can go ahead and divide each one of these by 2. So 2 goes into 6 3 times, 2 goes into 2 once, and it goes into this 2 once as well. So I get x is equal to, I have negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 22 over 3. Now remember, this gives us 2 solutions, so let's separate our answers. We have x is equal to negative 1 plus the square root of 22 over 3. We have x is equal to negative 1 minus the square root of 22 over 3. And this will be our final answer. Okay, let's take a look at some more problems. Solve using the quadratic formula. So I have x squared minus x plus 2 equals 0. Now for this particular equation, I already have one side equal to 0. So I could go ahead and just plug it into the quadratic formula. So I have x is equal to negative, and then my b, which is negative 1, plus or minus square root of b squared. So I have negative 1 raised to the second power minus 4 times a times c. So minus 4 times my a, which is 1, times c, which is 2. I have all over 2a, so all over 2 times 1. Now let's begin to simplify. I have x is equal to, so negative negative 1 gives me positive 1, and I have plus or minus the square root of, now negative 1 raised to the second power gives me positive 1. I have negative 4 times 1, which is negative 4, times 2, which gives me negative 8. I have all over 2. Simplifying further, I get 1 plus or minus square root of negative 7 over 2. And now since I have a negative inside of my square root, I need to simplify that by taking out an I. So I have 1 plus or minus I times the square root of 7 all over 2. And now this is the furthest I can simplify it. Let's just go ahead and split up our answers. We have 1 plus I times the square root of 7 over 2. And x equal to 1 minus I times the square root of 7 over 2. We have a couple more problems. So the same type of problem, solved using the quadratic formula. We have x squared minus 6x minus 4 equals 0. So once again, we already have one side equal to 0. So we could go ahead and plug it into our quadratic formula. So we have negative and then our b, which is negative 6, plus or minus square root of b squared. So I have negative 6 raised to the second power, minus 4 times a. My a in this case is 1. And then times c, which is negative 4. I have all over 2a. So all over 2 times my a, which is 1. Let's simplify. So negative 6 gives me positive 6, and I have plus or minus square root of negative 6 raised to the second power gives me positive 36. Then I have negative 4 times 1, which is negative 4, times another negative 4, which gives me positive 16. I have all over 2. So this gives me 6 plus or minus the square root of 52 over 2. Okay, but we're not quite finished yet because we have to simplify that radical. We have to simplify the square root of 52. So let's break down 52 using a factor tree. So I could use 2 and 26. 26 I could break down to 2 and 13. So since I have 2 of the same number, I could take that number out and put it on the outside of the square root. So I have x is equal to 6 plus or minus 2 times the square root of 13 over 2. And now since each one of these terms are divisible by 2, we could go ahead and divide each one of them by 2 to simplify our answer even further. Well, 2 goes into 2 once, it goes into this 2 once as well, and it goes into 6 3 times. So I have x is equal to 3 plus or minus the square root of 13. And if I separate my answers, I have x is equal to 3 plus the square root of 13, and x is equal to 3 minus the square root of 13. Let's take a look at one last example. We have 3 is equal to 5 over x plus 4 over x squared. Now this example, a little more challenging because we have these fractions. But since we're dealing with an equation, we could get rid of these fractions. We can multiply by the LCD, which in this case is x squared. So let's multiply each term by x squared. We get x squared times 3 is equal to x squared times 5 over x plus, so then I have x squared times 4 over x squared. So on the left hand side, x squared times 3, this gives me 3x squared, and I have equal to. Now the x squared times 5 over x, I'm going to rewrite x squared into x squared over 1, and now I could cross cancel. So one of my x's cancel out with one of them in the denominator. I'm left with x times 5, which gives me 5x. And I have plus, and now my x squareds cancel out. I'm left with 4. So now I have an equation without any fractions. So now I can go ahead and get one side to be equal to 0. So let's subtract 5x from both sides. And then subtract 4 from both sides as well. So I get 3x squared minus 5x minus 4 is equal to 0. And now I could go ahead and plug it into my quadratic formula. So I have x is equal to, I have negative and then b, which is negative 5, plus or minus square root of b squared. So I have negative 5 squared minus 4 times a, which is 3, times c, which is negative 4. And I have all over 2a, all over 2 times, and my a, which is 3. So let's begin to simplify. We have x is equal to, now negative 5 gives me positive 5. I have plus or minus the square root of negative 5 to the second power gives me 25. Now I have negative 4 times 3, which is negative 12. Negative 12 times negative 4 gives me positive 48. I have all over 6. So I have 5 plus or minus the square root of, now 25 plus 48 gives me 73, all over 6. Now square root of 73, well 73 is actually a prime number. There isn't two numbers that you can multiply together to give you 73 besides 1 and 73. So square root of 73, I cannot simplify it. So let's go ahead and break up our answers. We have 5 plus the square root of 73 over 6. And then x equal to 5 minus square root of 73 over 6. And now we have our two solutions. Our two solutions are completely simplified. So we're finished with this problem. So that was it for section 7.2. If you have any questions, just email me and I'll help you out.